Thank you, David, for those interesting introductions. It's always interesting coming on after a break, isn't it, really? Because and particularly it's nice and sunny outside, a few cold drinks, hopefully non-alcoholic, no sleeping. And also, of course, having had such an eventful morning. So the drumming really building up the energy. And then Bruce coming on stage and stealing most of my presentation. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to talk about in reality. So if you'll excuse me, I'll probably ad-lib a little bit through this as well. Which, as you know, for me, wouldn't be unusual. So I was reflecting a little bit on some comments from some of you guys about the conference in South Africa. And the last one we had here. And the last one we had in South Africa was in Sun City. It's interesting as we look around the room, because that was quite a while ago, 2008, we were in Sun City. Varda was doing my job at the time, so that's how long ago we are. And when I look around the room, some of you were there, and some of you were still in school, probably. And here you are running businesses today. But the reason I pick it up is that, as was mentioned by David and Bruce, we had some considerations about today, but I think we'd all say that this is absolutely the right move. And the reason I bring up the past a little bit, because I'll try and steal some of Bruce's presentation back, is that when we look back to 2008, it was a time when actually everything was really good. We were on this up. The market was good. We'd had a really good period. If you look at the slides Bruce showed you before we went to the big drop, we were up there. And it was really fascinating because in Sun City, we had a futurologist. And I just said to Andrew, I'm going to mention Andrew's with us in South Africa, who's perhaps not a futurologist, Andrew Bush, who's our guest speaker later, but an economist, a futurist. And for those that were there, you wouldn't have known all of it. But for those who were there that were sitting on the table, because I was hosting a table with our futurologist, and he was quite an interesting character. He got very emotional and became quite prophetic. So he asked me, where do we get our data from? What do we do with it? Where's it coming from? And I said, we've got various data points. We talked about Esther and our hubs that we have and pulling this information. He said, where'd you get your data from? The States? We went through that. He says, they're lying to you. If you remember, this was in, I think, May 2008. This guy says, they're all lying to you. He said, there's going to be the biggest financial collapse the world has seen. He actually named the Fannie Maes of this world. Interesting enough, he didn't name Lehman Brothers, which we tend to talk more about. And he went on about how America was broken. He said it's not around, everyone thinks it's just the immigration, as he put it, the Hispanics. He said it's middle America is broke and broken. 2008. It got so bad that he went on then to talk about, we tried to change the subject and talk about elections. If you remember, it's also when Barack Obama came to power. And someone asked what did he think, who was going to win? And he said, why do you care? It's just another country club. He said, you've got to understand where it is, get the gravity of the situation. I come back, we were on a high. The world was doing pretty well at that stage. And it got to such a point, I got quite worried. And I said to Varda, this guy is this American from, Italian-American actually, and American, from the Bronx, whose name has failed me. He's coming up with these predictions and he's pretty pessimistic. Are we sure we want to put him up? So anyway, we had a little chat with him and he wasn't quite so pessimistic, although he had some pessimistic slides. When you start your presentation with Wall Street in the depression of the 20s and people about to throw themselves off skyscrapers, it was kind of where are we headed with this? And the reason I raise it is because it's important that we come together. It was interesting that afterwards, of course, everything he said came true. It was really worrying. We talked about the sites in October time in 2008, July, I think it was, where he started going. And Varda and I were on a plane to Namibia, as it happens, to a board meeting. And she said to me, do you think we should cancel the site? It's sort of, as we were talking, I said, do you remember that guy from the Business Excellence Seminar in those days? The futurologist, he predicted all this stuff. And interesting enough, we couldn't get hold of him. But the reason I pick it up is that when we're having these conversations in these rooms and we're sharing, it's really important because you never know what's going to come out of it. You never know what we're going to take away. And as Bruce alluded to as well, this is a collaboration. This is about how we operate across the diamond value chain effectively. And how do we all play our part in it? Because we are. If we look around this room, the leaders of the diamond industry are within it. And so we need to make sure that we're all pulling together and challenging each other. And I thought it was great that after Bruce's presentation, no great surprise, a few people came up to me and said, "Not too sure about those polished price lines, Paul. They looked a bit positive to me." And we said, yeah, they possibly are, in some respects, because of what we feel today. And that's what we'll come on to. Ooh, if I can drive the presentation. Diamond crash, just don't ask how bad it is. How low can diamond prices go? I think everyone feels a little lower than what we think at the moment, perhaps. It's a question which no one can answer, but it's also a question which the diamond industry wishes no one would ask. But look at the date, because it feels like now, yes? The date was April 15th, 2020, COVID. It's not today, but it feels like today. For anyone who bought a diamond in the last 12 months, there might be a sinking feeling that they paid too much. The flip side is that the next 6 to 12 months could see a flood of bargains as jewelers are forced to generate cash by shifting excess stock. Do you remember that period? Do you remember sitting on Teams calls incessantly, talking about, is there a future world? If I'm honest, people wanting to, how can I put it politely, do various things to Mr. Rappaport. It would drop prices 7% at the time, as I recall, and the world was coming to an end. But actually, did it? Despite the disruptions from the pandemic, declining marriage rates, and the growing availability of lab-grown diamonds as less expensive, but structurally and chemically identical, that doesn't sound very loving to me, to be quite honest. Structurally and chemically identical. Substitute for the natural alternative, the market for natural mined diamonds jewelry has barely skipped a beat. And that's what we've got to think about as we're going through this. We're not here to be over-positive, but we are here to understand that we have been, as Bruce pointed out, through many cycles. It just feels terrible at the moment. And what we have to remember is that what we used to always refer to as the backward ripple, or the bullwhip effect, is what makes it feel so bad, and we'll see that when we look at some numbers in a minute. Polished, what did they actually say in the end? So we moved on a little bit to 2021. So 14 months or so later. Polished diamond prices are on a near year-long rally, rising more than 18% since last July, when they hit a record low. It's a testament to the vitality and lasting emotional as well as aesthetic value of diamonds in the eyes of consumers. We have an unbelievable product. The question is, do we still believe in our product? And I come back, we're talking natural diamonds, and that's what we have to remember. We go through cycles constantly, but when we're in the midst of it, which is the present, it just feels awful. And we have to remember where we came from. When we look at consumer demand, someone just said to me now, Paul, it's not actually about prices, it's about demand. That's the real issue. And so we come back to what we saw. And Bruce, again, alluded to it when he mentioned that in 2020, when COVID hit, of course we had a stop. The first time since the World War, actually. World War II was when we didn't have a site. And I remember it vividly because I was in Surat when New York closed. And I was in Surat for a reason. I was actually trying to find out what everyone was planning with respect to the coming pandemic and what could happen. Actually, I have to be honest, everyone was quite optimistic. It'll be okay. Just make sure you can get the diamonds to us, Paul. That didn't last too long, I have to be honest. Yeah, we had a quick change of heart. And it was kind of import bans yet again. And let's stop product coming through the system. And then, of course, we took the actions that Bruce has spoken about, actions we've taken today, and I'll come on to that in a moment. Those actions are basically that we have to make sure that we keep demand and supply in balance. So we quickly took actions in COVID, and we saw the industry, as it was in lockdown, initially by China. We seem to forget that. It came up in the figures in the slide that Bruce showed. China actually pulled us out of COVID, if you recall. That was the first one. We were locked down as they came back out of it very quickly. Admittedly, they sunk very deeply afterwards. Record years of demand. Yeah, as we came through 2021, people phoning me up saying, we're emptying the safe. Those individuals will know who they are. Said, Paul, what's happening? We've got goods going out of the safe that's been in there for years. The stock is old stock. Everything is moving. But how carried away did we get? Yeah, so as we moved along this journey and we jumped back, we have to ask the question, why? And that question was very much the fact that we had a very target-rich audience. In most terms, actually, they were very rich. Lots of free money, easy times, perhaps not so easy, but not a lot to spend it on. And suddenly our product was incredibly strong. Some of us were having a conversation earlier this week about consumer demand, and many times I've gone through this in these cycles where all of a sudden the world has fallen out of love with natural diamonds. Millennials don't care. But actually, in 2021, the main purchasers of these diamonds were indeed millennials. So they do care. Lab-grown were there. We'll see in a moment that 2021 and 2022 were huge years for lab-grown diamonds. But they were huge years as well for natural diamonds. The best ever. That's what people said to me. We've never known a time like this. I do always say that as an industry, we are rather bipolar. We're either on cloud nine celebrating or in the depths of despair. And we pass through it very quickly. So what we've got to find ourselves is, do we really understand where we're headed? Because what we're feeling at the moment is tough. But I don't for 1 minute believe that it's because people have fallen out of love with natural diamonds. I believe there are many external factors that are hurting that. And I would say we felt it as well. We felt it across the pipeline. So these are our sales for this year, up to cycle 8. And I start off by saying they're actually quite low at the beginning of the year. Yeah, we started off at the end of last year by pulling back. We could see the problems. 2022. I think many people remember 2022. I was actually with Raz in India, meeting with the German Jewelry Council. Some of you have been there. And we were talking about what is the state of the market, actions to be taken, import bans, what we were intending to do, etc. And then we were seeing many of you who are based in Mumbai. We had our meetings. And then I met with Vipul as part of Asian Star, not as the jewelry meeting. And Vipul said to me, God, you must have had a really couple of tough days, Paul. Must have been tough. And I said, yeah, it has been a little bit. But actually, it was much worse when I was here in the first quarter of 2022. And he thought I was mad at the time. I said, but it's a great time. I said, no, it was a crazy time. And I was here trying to explain that this was a bubble, and it's much more fearful for me when you're seeing bubbles being created because of the backward ripple. And so when Al talks about the future, and we talk about how we work better together in the future, although there are cycles, we can actually work through some of these cycles much more collaboratively and better into that future. And that's what needs to come. Because we're all, as Duncan will also tell you as well, very invested in the diamond industry. But it's not been an easy period. And although those sales are there, I appreciate that, very much appreciate actually, that as a Sightholder fraternity, you were very much supporting us in the industry through that first half of the year, because it wasn't easy. We were all still optimistic that China would reopen. And it has reopened. It just hasn't fully reopened economically to buying diamonds today. And we need to make sure we do what's right and necessary to do that. And we hear lots about marketing. We must put more money into generic marketing. And look, we believe certainly it's a combination of both. We know the brands have done exceptionally well over the period. May have calmed down a little bit now, but that's more again probably about over expectations of the future, buying in product to meet those expectations, and actually not having a bad year, just not having met them. And I come back, the backward ripple is very painful. So we've taken, before I get onto the flexibilities perhaps, we've taken a lot of reduction in flexibility in sales over the period. And as we get to cycle 8 and 9, of course, 9 will be significantly lower as well. And it's from that perspective, I'd certainly like to recognize the support that we get from our shareholders. We're very fortunate that we have Anglo American and Duncan's here who have supported us in making sure that we're able to hold the stock. And likewise in our other shareholder in Botswana, in the government of Botswana, they've also played their part in ensuring that we hold the stock in different parts of the pipeline, which also assists the entire industry. So it comes together, whether we started at the beginning with making sure we're optimistic and keeping going, then taking corrective actions. As an industry and a value chain, we come together, we will be successful. And as we've seen in the past, although it may feel terrible today, we will come out to a better future. So flexibility. Flexibility is an interesting one because it's a tool that we have. It's a tool that we can use within GSS to ensure that we can make sales, but at the same time, afford flexibility with everyone. And that flexibility was in place all year in different forms. And of course, as we've come to the end, we've looked at 100% flexibility. It's interesting, you can never win in this game either, because for some people, they would love to see opportunity and to grow their positions and find it a little frustrating. But as De Beers, we're leaders in the industry. And as our leadership comes forward, we take decisions not just for De Beers, not just for individuals, but for the industry as well. And we're able to do that, as I said, because we have tremendous support from our shareholders. And if we didn't have that, it would be really tough. But luckily, like us, everyone in this room, we believe. And we are invested in natural diamonds. And they are indeed our future. So Bruce shared a similar slide. It just goes to show how time is moving. I noticed Bruce's prices have dropped a little bit further. I was about to say we're optimistic to get down there. But it's an important slide, yeah, because it shows where lab-grown were anticipated to go and where they are going, because it's not over yet, not in my opinion. I think I can remember back in actually 2019. It's quite interesting whenever we go into a dip, lab-grown become the problem, the focal point, the issue. And that's a danger for us as well, because they are a problem, but they're not the problem in my opinion. So macroeconomics is a much bigger part to play in where we're feeling. And also lab-grown diamonds have got a part to play. We need to remember we also saw the production slide with Bruce. And that moves around a little bit, but we've probably lost around 30 million carats since 2017, with the disappearance of Argyle, etc., and others. And as a consequence, there are infrastructure issues. So lab-grown has a part to play. It's just not a natural diamond, but it can help with infrastructure. It can help support, and that's where it needs to be. Helping support infrastructure and operating at a different level. So I think the other important part as we'd launched Lightbox back in Bruce, was it 2017, is that we always talked about linear pricing. It wasn't about size, it was per carat, whatever size it was. And as we can see, at least at the wholesale level, that is where we're headed, totally. Yeah, so no differentiation on the price per carat at wholesale, just comes through and we pump it out. And the tsunami of polish, Lightbox was never going to be able to get up to speed quick enough to get a sufficient product to achieve this on its own. But in our view, India was always going to be able to do that. The industriousness of it, the opportunism, the entrepreneurship that comes through that, saw huge, as I say, tsunami of lab-grown polish coming through the system and into the US. And consequently, not only at wholesale, but also at retail, we have seen prices falling significantly and more accelerating, particularly in this latter part at retail. So as it got down to where we would hope it to be, of course, not yet. But as we were aware, as we go into the Christmas season, the Walmarts of this world will be entering at a very different price point. And we believe that will continue to put pressure on the lab-grown price overall. But I still think it's an interesting point that we shouldn't lose sight of. Just as we felt the impact of lab-grown in the 1 to 3 carat sweet spot, as we go forward and it gets to $500 a carat, it starts to impact other areas. So if I'm a consumer walking into Walmart today and I've got $500, I'll have a choice. Do I buy the 1 carat lab-grown, or do I buy the fashion jewelry that's got natural diamonds in it? But I do only have $500. So we need to be prepared that we haven't finished the game. We haven't won the war. It continues, and we continue to prepare, and we look ahead. And we must look ahead with a distance that's right for the future. One of the other things I think as an industry, a problem we have is we're very short-term, particularly in the midstream, not in the upstream. You can't be short-term in mining, as our mining colleagues will tell us. You pump billions of dollars into a mine before you get the return. It's a long-term game. And likewise, we need to take a longer view when we're in the midstream. We want to look at visions and strategies that are 5 to 10 years, not 5 to 10 months. That isn't where we want to be. There will be short-term tactical shifts. That's normal. But what is our vision? What are we looking for in 5 to 10 years? Particularly when we look at the long-term production scenarios. So again, I'll leave Al to take us into the future. But in the present, here and now, while it's feeling so difficult, that's when we should be looking for where the opportunities are to move forward. These are the times when we'll take decisions that will take our businesses to a different high. So in the depths of despair, when we have to make sure we're doing something, when we can't just spend money, that we really make the most crucial decisions. And then let's look at what's happening at retail. So for those of us who were in Vegas this year, there was a lot of lab-grown diamonds around. But there was a lot of fear in retail. There's lots of discussions. So what this slide is showing us is that in 2018-19, just as they were coming through, the margins were still difficult. It was still expensive to produce lab-grown at the time. But the critical point was, and what we felt the pain and the backlash is what's happened over 21, particularly, but also 2020, when the margins became so high, the actual dollars made as well, the gross margin, meant that the options for retailers were very tempting to sell lab-grown diamonds. If I'm honest, to tell some strange stories as well, not all of it being truthful. But as those prices have crashed, and we can see going into 2022, we get to parity, and that's why people were getting concerned, because when they look at absolute margins, we may be able to sell lots of these things, but the true dollars are very low. So as we go into 2023, we're starting to see natural as a gross, although we have to remember retail prices have not fallen the same as wholesale. Margins are considerably higher for retailers in natural as well. And we've seen low GDs crunching deeper. So the attractiveness to retailers is becoming less and less. And this is a change spot. Now, whether this season will be a last hurrah, whether it's people are just going to take the last bits of additional profit they can out of lab grown, or whether it'll be a little bit longer, we don't know. But that's not what should interest us. It's a longer term. The longer term trajectory is Lab-grown diamonds are going to move into a different spot, and natural diamonds will continue to regain the very place they should be, and why we should have confidence to invest in them into the future. And then let's move around. Bruce touched on the G7 particularly. Let's touch on that a little bit. And we said some time ago, actually a long time ago, we've come back of what is your line of sight? And many of you remember that coming out of COVID, actually we were talking about sanctions a long time before sanctions came. We're talking about them when the Crimea crisis. What would people do? And I come back, we have these conversations for a reason, that there are concerns. And our concern was that if there were sanctions on Russia, how would we differentiate non-Russian diamonds to Russian diamonds? How would that happen? What would that do for the industry? And just as we've had certain things, as I said, with our futurologists, sadly for us, that's actually playing through at the moment. That's exactly where we are, which is another force that's causing uneasiness. How comfortable are we that on 1st of January, there will be a system in place that allows polished to easily and understandably flow into the US at the most important 2 months of the year, from a midstream perspective, the restocking. What's going to happen then? And again, collaboration. We need to collaborate to make sure that we're landing at this moment in time, this is in the urgency of the moment, a solution that is workable, a solution that can help suitably differentiate, but also understanding the complexity of the industry and how we're a global industry, and recognizing that we have diamonds that flow around the world, and they need to do that in order to operate. Anything else is just going to add additional cost and significant cost, a cost that this industry can't bear today and shouldn't need to. So we have things like Tracer. Tracer wasn't established for sanctions. Tracer, Bruce, was back in 2016 when it came out, and it was about understanding the differentiation of products into the future and marketing. How will we make sure that we meet the consumer's needs in the future that will require for diamonds to know their journey, particularly that they haven't harmed anyone on the route to the jewelry store on the finger. And that's what Tracer was about. How do we make sure we can tell compelling stories about products that are different? How do we tell the wonderful stories that happen in our producer countries? How do we make sure we recognize the importance of our products, of diamonds to countries throughout Africa at this stage, but particularly Botswana, and particularly Namibia from our De Beers perspective? Not quite perhaps as important in South Africa. But still, how do they take the journey? They're very important to the people and lives who work with them. So Moses will tell you that here in South Africa, although as a country we're less than 1% of the GDP, we are everything up in Messina and Venetia. That's what that whole community works upon. As we go through the pipeline and we start looking at India, manufacturing, Surat, 1 million people, these are things that we have to make sure we're doing the right things and thinking to the future. Because the solutions of the past should be looked at. That's what we're doing earlier today. We should look at those solutions that we had for these downturns, but not assume that they're the right answers for the future, because the future will be different. When I was asked by a major retailer to disaggregate and could I do country of origin, I asked a question. I've actually asked a question many retailers. Does anyone actually ask where their diamonds come from? And the response was spot on. The response was, they may not ask today, Paul, but we're in this luxury business where we'll ensure they ask in the future. They're looking ahead. We're looking ahead. We all have to look ahead to make sure that we're fit for purpose. Tracer's been an amazing journey. What we did realize was it's not easy. Bruce, Wes, many will tell you as we've been on this journey, to get to where we wanted to be does take an awful lot of technical expertise, skill, to a point where we actually brought Tracer in before we go back out to make it an industry solution as well. It's really important to make sure that if we say that we know something, we can assure it. And unfortunately, there are many promises that don't always do that. We don't do that in De Beers. If we say we're going to do something, we make sure it's right. Come back, you see the numbers there, 1.5 million rough diamonds processed. Bruce touched on it as well. Obviously, all of our customers get to go on there first. We will see other producers coming onto this, and it will form part of a solution in the future, no doubt, to differentiation, but not just for sanctions. So to conclude the present, it's really tough. Yeah, let's be honest, it's not been an easy time. It's been, I think, at least 18 months of falling polish prices. 18 months. The last time we saw that was in 2015, as I recall. That was a particularly difficult time as well. It was more industry-based, actually, that we created our own problems at that moment in time. But what I would say is that as an industry, we have the abilities and capabilities in this room to not only bring this industry back from where it was, but to take it to new, much greater heights. And we do that through collaboration. We do that through working together. We do that through making sure that we're aligned across the value chain and making sure that we ensure that everyone across that value chain has a suitable profitability. And we know it's been tough across the value chain. There are good years and bad years. Let's make sure that we ride this storm, and when we go into the next upcycle, which we will do, no one knows as a crystal ball to say when it will be, but we know it's going to come. Let's make sure this time we take the right decisions now and in the upcycle to weather the next down one, because it's how we work together. On that note, thank you very much. And and talking of shareholder support, I'll ask Duncan to come and take over the role.
Thank you, Paul.